Hi, welcome to Sabbath School Daily, where we have been studying from this lesson right here, Psalms. This week we're studying from lesson number 2, which has the title, Teach Us to Pray, and today is Monday's lesson, which has the title, Trust in Times of Trouble. Now, before we get started in today's lesson, I'd like to ask you to read Psalm 44, because it's the psalm that is used in today's lesson to teach us what is going on when we are in times of trouble and it seems like God is not answering us, like he's disappeared. And Psalm 44 is a perfect example of that. Yesterday, we were talking about psalms that seem to contradict who God is, psalms that are asking for vengeance, psalms that are apparently violent. This is one of those psalms that, while it's not violent, it's a psalm that leads us to believe that the author thinks that God is actively against him. After all, look at what verse 18 and 19 say. They say, "Our heart has not turned back, nor have our steps departed from your way, but you have severely broken us in the place of jackals and covered us with the shadow of death." Now, does that sound like God breaking them in the place of jackals and bringing upon them the shadow of death? I don't believe so, especially if they're innocent. Here in this text, we're seeing people that are suffering and that they're seeing themselves innocent. They haven't walked away from the Lord. They haven't followed other gods. That's what he's saying throughout the chapter. And yet it seems like God has abandoned them. So how do we understand that? How do we understand that here in this chapter, chapter 44, this author sees him and his people as being innocent, and yet the Lord seems to be actively against them? Well, friends, this isn't something that is isolated to the book of Psalms. This is a theme that you see throughout Scripture, where people, they go through the silence of God, where they are crying out for answers, crying out for something from the Lord, and it seems as though God is nowhere to be found. You don't find that only here in this book. You see that throughout the life of so many heroes in the Bible. You see that in the life of Abraham. You see that in the life of Jacob. You see that in the life of Joseph, of Moses. You see that in the very life of Christ, where in the Gethsemane, he cries out and he doesn't want what is about to happen, and yet he is able to say, "Not my will, Lord, but yours." But do you see how these themes of the apparent abandonment of God, they're not isolated to only one person or one place in Scripture? This is throughout the whole of the Bible. And yet, the Bible is a theistic book, obviously, right? It's a book about God. It's a book about the existence of a loving, caring God. So how do we conciliate these two sides? The God that is apparently abandoning his people and the God who loves, who cares, and who is close. Well, the thing is that as humans, we process emotion, we process our life, our experience in our own way. We don't understand God's way. We don't know what he does, how he does it, why he does it, or even when he does it. Our timeline is not God's timeline. The truth is that he always knows best. After all, the Bible does tell us that his thoughts are way above our thoughts. And so in that, the true exercise is the exercise of patience and of faith. Something that you do see here in this chapter is that while the author, he does have this struggle with God, "Lord, where are you? You've abandoned us. You're breaking us in the place of jackals." While he does say that, in the beginning of the chapter, he reminds himself and the people that are singing this psalm, that are praying this psalm, he reminds them that God has done great things in the history of his people. And so he's exercising his faith. You see, faith is based on past actions of trust. Because the Lord has done this, I trust him, I believe in him for the future. If someone walks up to you on the street, out of the blue, someone random that you don't know, and asks you for $10,000 to help his sick mother that's in the hospital, are you going to readily just give that money to that person? Or are you going to ask some questions? Are you going to investigate to see if it's a legitimate claim before you consider giving that amount of money? Right? With the promise that it's going to be paid back someday. I don't know about you, but I don't think that I would do that. That's an easy way to get scammed. But if someone comes up to me, someone that I know, someone that I trust, someone that has a track record with me and asks me for that amount of money, well, if I have that amount of money, I'm more inclined to lend it to that person because I know that they're good for it. That's how faith works. Faith is based on a past track record. You don't give faith out of nothing. You don't give faith for nothing. That's why having a relationship with the Lord is so important, because it establishes a baseline of trust. Because he's done this and this and this, and because he's been this and this and this in my life, I know that I can place my faith in him. That's where the Bible comes into play, because as we read the Bible, we see who God is. We get to know his personality. We get to put into practice the things that we learn in there. That's why the study of Scripture is so important. You come to know God. So here, while the author of this psalm is going through a very difficult time, and the children of Israel are going through a very difficult time, he knows that God is trustworthy. He can't understand why the Lord is distant, why the Lord is apparently nowhere to be found, but he knows that he can trust him. So I hope that you can see the duality here, the extremes of this psalm. And what that tells me is that in my prayer life to the Lord, and I think that this goes back to what we were talking about yesterday in the question that was made to the channel, how do I understand these violent psalms or, these psalms of disbelief? I think that when it comes to prayer, the Lord doesn't censor us. He allows us to be ourselves, to be raw, to hurt, to be angry, to be frightened, to be frustrated. That's how you act with a friend. You don't have to pretend. You don't have to measure your words. You don't have to censor yourself. With a friend, you are yourself. And look, no one knows you better than God. No one knows the raw you better than the Lord. That's why in your personal prayer life, be open with God. Tell him when you're angry. Tell him when you're frustrated. Tell him when you're afraid. Tell him when you're angry with him. Tell him, Lord, I can't believe that this happened. I prayed about this. I don't understand why this is happening right now or why you would allow this to happen. But you know what, Lord? I trust you, and I know that somehow your way is the best way. That's the invitation of Psalm 44, to place these worries, this anger, these burdens on the Lord and to allow him to be present in these times of trouble. I hope that today's lesson was a blessing to you. This theme has been very big in my life. Moments where praying to the Lord, not knowing why he's taking so long, why he's nowhere to be found, why he's doing things the way that he's doing. That's been big in my life, and prayers where I really don't get it, and I make that very well known to the Lord. But he patiently, lovingly calms me down and guides me in the future. So I hope that that's your experience as well. Again, study the lesson. This is a very important theme to understand why God isn't doing what I thought he would do, why the Lord isn't where I thought he would be. That's a big thing in the Christian journey. So study the lesson, look up Psalm 44 especially, but try to find more Psalms that have the same theme going on. There are several of them, and I'm sure that that will be a blessing to you. Please comment down below. I love hearing from you. And also please remember to like, to share, and to subscribe to our videos. We release one every day. And I hope to see you again here tomorrow for another Sabbath School Daily.